Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. Thank you for joining me. I'm sitting in the car outside the building where Marina goes every week for her physical therapy. So I just dropped her off and she's inside getting worked over. So I thought it'd be a good time to shoot a video about, particularly about something I want to talk about. You know, when you want to really understand what America is all about or should be all about, when you really want to understand what our philosophy should be with regard to, politics and what have you, when you want to understand the framework of this nation and the original blueprint for this nation, then you really just have to go back to the beginning, and you go back and you look at what the founders and the framers and the first presidents and the statesmen of America, what they kind of had in mind when the country was founded, and what their general philosophy was about governance in America, and how we should approach things such as fiscal matters and being fiscally responsible, what they believed about taxation, what they believed about liberty and freedom, and what they believed about foreign policy. I think it's safe to say that here in 2024, with our current lot of political leadership, Democrat or Republican, it makes little difference, we have strayed far away from our moorings, from our framers' intentions for our nation. We are far away from the template, from the blueprint, from those instructions that were given to us by the founders and framers of the United States. I think it's really always good if you want to understand anything, you got to start at the beginning. You got to go back to the roots. You got to go back to the basic framework, where everything was laid out, and we were given instructions of how we were to conduct ourselves as Americans via the government and our laws and our way of life. We are at great variance with how our founders and framers intended for us to be, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more today, specifically with regard to foreign policy, specifically with regard to how we interact with other nations on the earth. Now, there is no doubt that as we sit here today, we have among our political leadership in America, again, both parties, this undying, unnatural, un-American, I would maintain, affection for the state of Israel in particular. It's true of other nations as well, but in particular to the state of Israel. And I've done a lot of videos talking about that, and I just want you to understand that our views toward Israel are misguided at the very least. And I'm going to tell you that George Washington, no less than the father of our country, weighed in on this matter, and he taught us and talked to us about how we should approach the state of Israel. And I'm going to get to that in just a moment. But I want to reiterate what I've said over and over again. It makes no sense for us to be supporting the state of Israel for several reasons. One reason being because they have enough money on their own. Another reason is simply this: it is because of their treatment, the Jewish treatment, the Zionist treatment, and the Islamic treatment of Christians in Israel and Palestine, where they are absolutely committing nothing but ethnic cleansing in Gaza. These are Christians who are being slaughtered by the Zionists. And if you're a Christian watching me in America, it is time for you to understand what's happening to your fellow Christians at the hands of these Zionists, who many American Christians claim are the chosen people of God. That's a little schizophrenic, don't you think? While your Christian brethren and their children are being massacred and slaughtered at the hands of God's chosen people, the state of Israel, how can you just sit on your hands and continue to latch on to a fatally flawed philosophy that these people are somehow God's chosen people? It is simply not the case. But I don't want to get sidetracked on that. I want to get to what George Washington has to say to us with regard to our devotion of Israel. And by the way, it has been said by assorted American political leaders that we have no greater ally in the world than the state of Israel. Really? Well, how do you think that makes other allies feel, such as Great Britain, Canada, Australia, and others? These are nations who stood with us in the most dark times of our history, such as the Second World War, when they were our allies and they helped us to win that war. How do you think that makes them feel? Is Israel really our number one ally? Should they be our number one ally? Is it possible that they say that because so many American politicians are bought and paid for by AIPAC, by the Israeli lobby? I've touched about this before, but it bears repeating. I don't have an exact number for you, but I can tell you that there are a lot, and I mean a lot, of American federal politicians in both parties who are doing the bidding of Israel because Israel and its lobby is paying our politicians off in order to get them to support Israel's interest in Congress. Now, do you think that's right? Do you think it's right that American politicians would be receiving money from Israel, or any other nation for that matter, and in exchange for their money, exchange for these bribes basically, they vote the way that Israel wants them to vote? Don't you think it should be the case that American politicians should be doing the bidding of Americans only? That only makes sense to me. But I'm telling you that Democrat and Republican politicians in Washington are being bought off by Israel to the tune of millions and millions of dollars. Mitch McConnell, $1.5 million by AIPAC. Ted Cruz, Charles Schumer, the list, Adam Pencilneck Geith Schiff. The list, I could go on and on. I could go on all morning about how many millions of dollars Israel is putting in the pockets of American politicians in exchange for them voting in Israel's best interest. Hey, you remember us Americans down here, Mr. Politician, Mrs. Politician? Have you forgotten about us? I can't give Mitch McConnell $1.5 million to do my bidding, but by God, Israel certainly can. That to me should be criminal. No American politician should be taking any money, not one red cent, from any lobbyist for the state of Israel, any lobbyist for any other nation, any lobbyist from any corporation. They shouldn't be taking any money from any special interest, but they do it every day to the tune of millions of dollars. What do you believe George Washington, the father of our country, would have to say about that? What do you think James Madison or Thomas Jefferson would have to say about something like that? Now, if we want to examine how America should be handling our relationship with Israel or any other nation, I think it behooves us to take a look in the past at what some of our founders had to say about such things. And I want to give you a powerful quote from George Washington, the first president of the United States. And this is what President Washington said in his voluminous farewell address. And he is telling us in this address what our attitude and our action should be toward the state of Israel. Listen closely. I quote from George Washington. "Nothing is more essential than that permanent, inveterate antipathies against particular nations and passionate attachments for others should be excluded, and that in place of them a just and amicable feelings towards all should be cultivated." Did you catch that? Let me read it again. Nothing is more essential than that permanent, inveterate antipathies against particular nations and passionate attachments for others should be excluded. Hello? And that in place of them, just and amicable feelings toward all should be cultivated. All. He said passionate attachment for others should be excluded. That's the father of our country. That's the father of our country schooling us all about how we should approach the state of Israel. Passionate, just put in the word Israel. Nothing is more essential than that permanent inveterate antipathies against Israel. And passionate attachment for Israel should be excluded. That's George Washington. And in place of them, just and amicable feelings toward all should be cultivated. With this wisdom, George Washington echoed the wisdom of other American founders. Let's see what others had to say about this. Thomas Jefferson said this, quote, peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none, unquote. That's Thomas Jefferson. Entangling alliances with none. Does none include Israel? You better believe it does. Let's look at John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams said this, America has abstained from interference in the concerns of others, even when conflict has been for principles to which she clings. She is the well-wisher to the freedom and independence of all. She is the champion and vindicator of only her own. Is this not a 1-2-3 punch to the current philosophy that our politicians hold toward Israel or any other nation? John Quincy Adams said she is the champion, that's us, America, she is the champion and vindicator only of her own. What's he saying? He's saying we're going to mind our own business. How many of you wish John Quincy Adams was the president right now? Bet we wouldn't be so broke. You'd think we'd have $35 trillion worth of debt if any of these three men were the president? I think not. Now listen at what Washington said as he continued. He said, this is not a quote, in addition to the, quote, passionate attachments, unquote, George Washington denounced habitual hostility. Listen to me carefully. Washington denounced habitual hostility toward other countries. As he said that he said the U.S. government's passionate attachment to Israel itself is itself the font of hostilities, equally unrooted in American interest. This is what Washington said about passionate attachments. Listen closely, I quote, "The nation which indulges towards another an habitual hatred or an habitual fondness is in some degree a slave. It is a slave to its animosity or to its affection, either of which is sufficient to lead it astray from its duty and its interest," unquote. Washington is saying to the American people, we should have neither a habitual fondness toward any other nation or a habitual animosity toward any other nation. We should just mind our own business. And whatever Israel is doing, or Russia is doing, or England is doing, or Argentina is doing, or Canada is doing, let them do it. As long as they're not, invading us. That's another matter, of course. which we've talked about a great deal. But while it is a little less universal these days, this habitual fondness, Washington noted, for Israel remains widespread, folks, in American politics, particularly on the right and center left, and more so among government officials than its citizens. You know, there's a lot of Americans who are waking up to this, and a lot of Americans are not following the party line with regard to our allegiance and devotion to Israel, and good for them. The allegiance and devotion of American politicians should be toward the American people, period, as it should be in any country where you may reside. Your political leaders, their interest should be for you and your country, period. Is that too much to ask? What is it about this animosity that we have towards certain other nations in the world? I've talked about this in the past, and I've asked the question, why do we hate Russia? For what logical reason do we hate Russia as Americans? Or not as Americans, but why do our American leaders foment this hatred and this animosity toward Russia in particular? It makes no sense. It's not logical at all. There's no reason we should hate them. What are they doing to us? I believe there's two answers to that question. I've talked about this a great deal, so not to expound on it, but I want to get to what another world leader had to say about this in just a moment. I believe that we hate Russia simply because Russia won't bow its knee to us. And I believe that we hate Russia, we being our political leadership, because Russia, quite frankly, folks, is by and large a Christian nation. And I believe that that just pours the gas on the fires, if you will, because so many of our leaders are so anti-Christian, particularly when they're bought and paid for by the Israeli lobby, the Zionists. These people aren't God-fearing people. They are by and large not Christians. Maybe when it comes to election time they may claim to be, but how many of them, like Joe Biden, actually act like Christians, for heaven's sakes? I mean, the proof's in the pudding, right? Are you a fruit inspector? Does Joe Biden act like a Christian in your opinion? I'm not asking you to be judgmental, but just use a little common sense. How many Christians act like that? Perpetually lying, a pathological liar, supporting abortion up to the point of birth. How many Christians believe that? None I know. But what's with this animosity, this hatred toward Russia? Let's examine this a little further, and I want to give you a quote from Margaret Thatcher. Remember Margaret Thatcher? She was the Prime Minister of the UK. She was Prime Minister pretty much during the Reagan years, when President Reagan was in office. I found a quote by Margaret Thatcher that she said about the, I believe it, I didn't get the time of the quote, but I believe it was when Russia was still the old communist Soviet Union. And this is what she said about Russia. And this is a quote. Listen at this. If you were to make a table of countries in proportion to the natural resources they have, the top one would almost certainly be Russia. She has everything: oil, gas, diamonds, platinum, gold, silver, all the industrial metals, marvelous standing timber, and a wonderfully rich soil, unquote. That's Margaret Thatcher talking about Russia, and you know what? She's exactly right. So when you examine that quote and you see all of the natural resources that the nation of Russia has, does that give us any clue why Western political leaders hate her so? Is it because Russia does have so many rich natural resources that maybe there's some politicians would like to get their hands on, but they can't? Am I on to something here? Are Western political leaders angry with Russia because Russia refuses to be colonized or balkanized? Think about it. You know, we have a bad habit in the West of just invading other nations that aren't doing things the way we think we ought to do them. Serbia, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Libya, Niger. I know I'm leaving some out. All these nations who refuse to do the bidding of Western powers, well, they got a target on their back, don't they? If they refuse to use the dollar as their reserve currency like Gaddafi did in Libya, well, you're not long for this world. But you know what? There's some nations that the West can bully. Ain't nobody bullying Russia, folks. Ain't nobody going into Russia and saying, all right, we're in charge now, you bow your knee to us. Putin says not only no, but hell no. We are a largely Christian nation. We value our sovereignty, and you're not taking us over. You're not going to colonize us. You're not going to tell us how to run things. We'll run our own affairs. Thank you very much. Do you think we have something to learn from the founders and framers? Do you believe George Washington would take the same stance that Joe Biden takes toward Russia, toward Israel? Do you think John Quincy Adams would? Do you think Thomas Jefferson would? Do you think these men would be bankrupting us with our military expansionism all over the world? If you listen closely, George Washington speaks to us very clearly about how we should approach the state of Israel, as does Adams, as does Jefferson, and so many others that I could talk about in this video. We need to mind our own business. We have enough problems of our own. We are being invaded on a daily basis, as you know, and we are beyond unfathomable bankruptcy. And our politicians are bought and paid for by this godless state of Israel, and they are lining their pockets with multiplied millions of dollars. That's what's going on, my friends. Give me your comments down below about what I talked about today. I would really appreciate it. Subscribe to the old Triple T channel if you have not. I got to go pick up Marina. Hopefully they didn't wear her out too bad. Hey, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. This is Trailer Trash Tim, and I'll talk to you soon.